In the quiet moments after you finally put down your phone, do you feel it? That subtle void expanding within your chest, a hollowness that wasn't there before you began scrolling. This emptiness is not coincidental. It is the first and most profound sign that your soul's energy is being drained by modern media consumption. The ancient wisdom traditions have long understood that energy follows attention. When we repeatedly direct our consciousness toward external stimuli designed to capture and manipulate our awareness, we are essentially offering our spiritual essence to these systems. As Edgar once observed, the mind is the builder, the physical is the result. And nowhere is this more evident than in how media shapes our inner landscape. Consider what happens energetically during a typical social media session. You begin with a certain vibrational state, perhaps even a sense of purpose or peace. As you consume content, news feeds, status updates, endless streams of carefully curated lives, something shifts within. The content itself may seem innocuous, even entertaining, but the subtle transaction occurring is one where your vital spiritual energy is being redirected and, in many cases, harvested. This sensation of emptiness arises because media platforms are designed not to fill you up, but to create spaces of lack that can only temporarily be satisfied by more consumption. They operate on principles contrary to spiritual fulfillment, where spiritual practices aim to help you find contentment within. These platforms systematically teach your soul that satisfaction lies in the next scroll, the next video, the next notification. The symptoms manifest clearly. After engaging with news or social networks, you experience a spiritual exhaustion that transcends mere physical tiredness. There's a peculiar sense of purposelessness that settles upon you like a fine mist, hardly noticeable at first, but eventually coating everything in your perceptual field. What makes this emptiness particularly insidious is how it masquerades as connection. You appear to be engaging with the world, with ideas, with others, yet the engagement is illusory. Real spiritual connection leaves you feeling more whole, more present, more alive. This digital engagement, by contrast, leaves a deficit in its wake. The vibrational frequency of content designed to trigger emotional responses, particularly fear, outrage, or envy, creates a dissonance within your energetic field. Your soul, which naturally resonates with higher frequencies of love, compassion, and peace, becomes disrupted. This disruption manifests as that familiar emptiness, a signal from your deepest self that something is amiss. Pay attention to the moments immediately after media consumption. Does your breath feel shallower? Does your mind race more quickly, jumping from thought to thought without rest? Does the world around you, the actual physical environment you inhabit, seem somehow less vibrant, less real? These are the energetic indicators that your soul is being depleted rather than nourished. This emptiness also reflects a spiritual principle. We become what we contemplate. When we spend hours absorbing content that emphasizes lack, conflict, and separation, our souls begin to mirror these qualities. The ancient texts speak of guarding the gates of perception precisely because they understood this principle. What we repeatedly allow into our consciousness shapes the very essence of who we are becoming. The most concerning aspect of this emptiness is how it grows more familiar with time. What initially felt disturbing, that hollow sensation after hours online, gradually becomes your new baseline. Your soul's natural fullness, its inherent connection to source energy, recedes from memory. This is how the drain becomes normalized, how we collectively forget what genuine spiritual vitality feels like. This emptiness creates a perfect condition for dependency. The soul, seeking to fill the void, turns back to the very source of its depletion, and thus begins a cycle that serves everything but your highest spiritual development. The systems feeding on your attention have no interest in your wholeness. Their design is precisely the opposite. To begin reclaiming your soul's energy, simply observe this emptiness without judgment when it arises. Recognition is the first step toward healing. Notice the contrast between how you feel after media consumption versus after moments in nature, in genuine connection with loved ones, or in spiritual practice. This awareness itself begins to disrupt the pattern of energy depletion. The second sign of soul depletion manifests as a profound emotional attachment to digital validation. This dependency represents more than a habit. It signifies a spiritual tethering, where your soul's natural well-being becomes increasingly contingent upon external digital affirmation. Consider the spiritual mechanics at work. Your attention, which ancient wisdom traditions recognize as your most precious energetic resource, becomes fragmented and dispersed across countless digital interactions. Each notification triggers a small dopamine release, creating a biochemical reward system that gradually rewires your spiritual discernment. What begins as casual engagement evolves into a subtle form of energetic bondage. The soul, in its natural state, draws nourishment from within, from connection to higher consciousness, from moments of presence, from the eternal now. Yet in this state of media dependency, it begins seeking sustenance from fleeting digital acknowledgements. This represents an inversion of the spiritual order, where external validation supplants internal knowing. Observe how your emotional landscape fluctuates based on digital feedback. A post that receives little engagement may trigger disproportionate disappointment. A critical comment may disrupt your inner peace for hours or days. Conversely, receiving positive reinforcement online provides a temporary elevation that quickly dissipates, leaving you craving more. This emotional volatility signals that your soul's equilibrium has become externalized. This dependency creates what spiritual teachers might call an energetic tether, invisible cords connecting your spiritual essence to a system designed not for your enlightenment, but for your continued engagement. These tethers drain vital life force energy, redirecting it from spiritual growth toward consumption patterns. The consequences extend beyond momentary emotional reactions. Over time, this dependency restructures your spiritual perception, training the soul to value itself according to metrics designed by algorithms rather than divine principles. Your inherent worthiness, which spiritual wisdom tells us is absolute and unchangeable, becomes conditional, subject to external evaluation and numeric measurement. What makes this sign particularly concerning is how it compromises spiritual sovereignty. When your emotional well-being depends on digital feedback, you have essentially outsourced authority over your inner state. This surrender of spiritual autonomy occurs gradually, almost imperceptibly, until the soul finds itself responding to digital stimuli with the conditioned precision of Pavlov's experiments. The spiritual texts across traditions warn against placing one's peace in temporary conditions. Yet the feed dependency does precisely this. It anchors your well-being to the most ephemeral of validations. Today's viral post becomes tomorrow's forgotten content, leaving the soul constantly seeking the next affirmation, the next moment of digital recognition. This dependency also disrupts the soul's natural rhythms. Rather than moving at the pace of spiritual unfoldment, which often requires patience, silence, and periods of apparent inactivity, the feed-dependent soul becomes synchronized to the frenetic tempo of digital platforms. It learns to expect immediate responses, instant gratification, and constant stimulation. These expectations transfer to all aspects of life, including spiritual growth, creating frustration when the soul's authentic development refuses to conform to algorithmic timetables. Consider too how this dependency affects your capacity for presence. The feed-dependent soul develops a habit of continually checking for updates, even during moments of potential spiritual connection. During conversations with loved ones, walks in nature, or periods set aside for meditation. This divided attention prevents the deep immersion in the present moment that nourishes spiritual awareness. The social validation feedback loop exploits a fundamental spiritual vulnerability, our desire for connection and recognition. This desire itself isn't problematic. Indeed, it reflects our inherent understanding that we are relational beings. The distortion occurs when this natural yearning is redirected towards systems optimized not for authentic connection, but for extracting maximum engagement. To begin healing this dependency, practice mindful awareness of your emotional responses to digital interactions. When you feel elation at receiving likes or comments, or disappointment at their absence, gently bring awareness to these reactions without judgment. Ask yourself, is my soul's peace truly dependent on this feedback? What unchanging value exists within me regardless of external validation? Establish regular periods of digital fasting, times when you deliberately disconnect from all social platforms and observe the emotional withdrawal symptoms that arise. These symptoms, anxiety, restlessness, fear of missing out, reveal the extent of the dependency and provide an opportunity to re-establish connection with your soul's self-sustaining nature. Remember that spiritual traditions have long taught that true fulfillment comes not from accumulating external validation, but from recognizing the unchanging essence within. As you begin to disentangle your soul's well-being from digital feedback loops, you create space for rediscovering this essential truth. The journey toward liberation from feed dependency isn't about rejecting technology entirely, but about restoring proper spiritual hierarchy, where your inner knowing, your connection to higher consciousness, and your inherent worthiness take precedence over algorithmic validation. In this restoration lies the key to reclaiming your soul's energy from the draining cycle of digital dependency. Perhaps the most profound yet subtle sign of spiritual energy depletion occurs in the gradual disappearance of inner silence, that sacred space where your soul communes with higher consciousness. This third sign manifests as an increasing discomfort with stillness and a diminishing capacity to access your intuitive wisdom. In spiritual traditions across the world, silence has been revered as the fertile ground from which authentic knowing emerges. It is in moments of inner quietude that the voice of intuition, what some traditions call the higher self, can be heard most clearly. Yet the constant exposure to media creates a persistent internal noise that drowns out this subtle inner guidance. Consider what happens energetically when you spend hours engaged with screens. Your consciousness becomes externally oriented, trained to process a rapid succession of stimuli designed specifically to capture and maintain your attention. This creates what spiritual teachers might call consciousness fragmentation, a state where awareness becomes scattered across countless external data points rather than centered within. This fragmentation gradually reshapes your spiritual perception. The mind becomes habituated to constant input, developing what could be described as an information addiction. Like all addictions, this creates a profound discomfort when the stimulus is removed. Sit in silence after extensive media consumption and observe what arises: restlessness, anxiety, an almost irresistible urge to reach for the phone. This discomfort reveals how deeply the capacity for inner stillness has been compromised. The implications for spiritual development are significant. Throughout history, mystics and spiritual teachers have emphasized that certain forms of knowing can only emerge in silence. Meditation, contemplation, and prayer all create spaces of receptivity where higher guidance can be received. As your tolerance for silence diminishes, so too does your access to these deeper dimensions of spiritual awareness. This loss affects not just formal spiritual practice, but moment-to-moment living. Intuition often speaks through subtle impressions: a quiet knowing, a gentle nudge, a feeling that defies logical analysis. These delicate, intuitive signals require a certain quality of inner attention to be perceived. When the internal environment is cluttered with the residue of media consumption, fragmented thoughts, emotional reactions to content, subconscious processing of thousands of images, these intuitive whispers go unheard. The spiritual effects extend beyond individual moments of guidance. Extended periods away from inner silence create a kind of spiritual amnesia, a forgetting of who you truly are beyond social identities and constructed narratives. Media platforms constantly reinforce limited self-concepts, categorizing users through preferences, political leanings, demographic data, and consumption patterns. These external definitions, when repeatedly encountered, begin to override the deeper self-knowledge that emerges only in silence. What makes this sign particularly insidious is how it alters your relationship with time. Spiritual traditions teach that present moment awareness, being fully here now, is essential for soul development. Yet media consumption trains consciousness to constantly anticipate the next piece of content, the next notification, the next update. This creates a subtle but persistent future orientation that pulls attention away from the present moment, the only point where spiritual presence can be truly experienced. Notice too how this loss of inner silence affects your dream life. Dreams represent an important channel through which the soul communicates, integrates experiences, and sometimes receives guidance. Yet research suggests that excessive screen time, particularly before sleep, disrupts both sleep quality and dream recall. This represents another pathway of spiritual communication diminished through media consumption. The vibrational aspect of this phenomenon cannot be overlooked. From a spiritual energy perspective, each piece of content carries its own frequency. Content designed to trigger fear, outrage, or anxiety vibrates at demonstrably lower frequencies than states of peace, compassion, or gratitude. Extended exposure to lower frequency content gradually attunes your energy field to these same frequencies, making the higher vibrational states associated with spiritual connection increasingly difficult to access. This process creates a form of spiritual interference, static, that obscures the clear reception of higher guidance. Just as radio signals become distorted when encountered with certain electromagnetic fields, so too does spiritual communication become garbled when your energy field is saturated with the frequencies of digital media. What might have come through as clear guidance becomes, at best, partially perceived, and at worst, entirely missed. The most concerning aspect of this sign is its self-perpetuating nature. As inner silence diminishes, the discomfort with stillness grows, leading to increased media consumption to avoid this discomfort. This creates a downward spiral where the very medicine needed, periods of digital detox and renewed communion with silence, becomes increasingly difficult to administer. To begin reversing this process, start with small periods of intentional silence. Even 5 minutes of sitting without digital distraction can begin reacquainting your soul with its natural state of receptive awareness. Notice the resistance that arises, the almost magnetic pull toward distraction, and recognize it not as a failure, but as evidence of how deeply this pattern has become embedded. Gradually extend these periods of silence, perhaps using the breath as an anchor for awareness. With consistent practice, you'll begin noticing subtle shifts, increased sensitivity to intuitive guidance, greater clarity of thought, spontaneous insights arising from seemingly nowhere. These are signs of your soul re-establishing its connection to inner silence. Remember that spiritual traditions have always emphasized the need to periodically withdraw from external stimulation. The Desert Fathers of early Christianity, Buddhist monks, Hindu yogis, and contemplatives across traditions have understood that certain forms of knowing emerge only when external noise subsides. In our digital age, creating these spaces of silence represents not a rejection of technology, but an act of spiritual wisdom, a deliberate choice to maintain access to your soul's deepest knowing. Through recommitting to periods of inner silence, you reclaim not just your attention, but your spiritual sovereignty, your capacity to hear the voice of your own soul amidst the clamor of a media-saturated world. The fourth critical sign of soul depletion through media exposure manifests as artificially induced anxiety and fear, emotions that serve not your spiritual growth, but rather systems designed to keep consciousness tethered to lower vibrational frequencies. This manufactured emotional landscape creates an energetic prison that few recognize, yet many inhabit. From a spiritual perspective, emotions generate specific vibrational fields that either elevate or diminish your soul's natural frequency. Fear, anxiety, outrage, and despair, the very emotions that media algorithms have been optimized to trigger, vibrate at demonstrably lower frequencies than peace, compassion, gratitude, and love. This is not coincidental, but strategic. A soul maintained in lower vibrational states becomes more predictable, more controllable, and more prone to seeking relief through consumption. Consider the spiritual mechanics at work. When you encounter content designed to provoke fear, whether about health threats, economic collapse, environmental catastrophes, or social breakdown, your energy field contracts. This contraction represents a spiritual defensive posture that, while occasionally appropriate in genuine danger, becomes energetically depleting when chronically maintained. Your life force, rather than flowing freely in creative expression, becomes diverted toward maintaining this state of alert vigilance against threats that rarely materialize in your immediate experience. Media platforms understand this dynamic intuitively, if not explicitly. Content that evokes fear and anxiety creates biological and energetic hooks that keep attention fixated. Each fearful headline, Each anxiety-inducing image creates what spiritual teachers might call an energy leak, a point where your soul's vitality drains away into systems designed to harvest and monetize attention. What makes this particularly destructive is how these manufactured emotions disconnect you from your spiritual center, that inner core of peaceful awareness that remains unchanged regardless of external circumstances. Ancient wisdom traditions teach that true spiritual protection comes not from frantically responding to every perceived threat, but from maintaining connection to this unchanging center. Yet media-induced anxiety systematically pulls consciousness away from center and toward periphery, toward the ever-changing circumstances that cannot provide genuine security. This fear-based programming creates what some spiritual teachers call frequency entrainment, where your energy field begins to synchronize with the lower vibrations constantly encountered. Just as a smaller tuning fork will begin vibrating at the frequency of a larger one nearby, your spiritual energy gradually attunes to the predominant frequencies you expose yourself to. Through this process, many unknowingly lower their vibrational state to match the media landscape they inhabit. The spiritual consequence extends beyond momentary emotional states. Prolonged exposure to fear-inducing content actually reshapes your field of probability, the quantum possibilities you're able to attract and manifest. Spiritual laws suggest that we draw to ourselves experiences that match our dominant vibrational state. A consciousness steeped in media-induced anxiety thus becomes a magnet for precisely the scenarios it most fears, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of manifestation that further convinces the soul that the world is indeed a dangerous place requiring constant vigilance. This sign of soul depletion often manifests physically as well: tension in the body, disrupted sleep patterns, digestive issues, and immune suppression. The wisdom traditions have long understood that energy precedes matter, that spiritual states ultimately express themselves physically. The body, in its wisdom, reflects the soul's response to this constant barrage of fear-inducing stimuli. Now, having recognized these four critical signs of soul depletion, we turn to the essential question: how can you protect your spiritual energy in a media-saturated world? The path forward is not about rejection of technology, but rather about conscious engagement that maintains spiritual sovereignty. Begin with awareness, the cornerstone of all spiritual practice. Before engaging with any media, pause to set conscious intention. Ask yourself, does this content serve my highest spiritual development? Will it elevate or diminish my vibrational state? This simple practice of mindful discernment creates a protective field around your consciousness, filtering content through the lens of spiritual benefit rather than algorithmic suggestion. Establish energetic boundaries through regular spiritual cleansing practices. Just as you would shower to remove physical dirt, implement daily practices to clear psychic residue accumulated through media exposure. This might include visualization techniques, where you imagine light flowing through your energy field, dissolving any lower vibrations, sound healing through mantras or sacred music that elevate your frequency, or elemental cleansing through immersion in nature, forest bathing, ocean swimming, or barefoot contact with earth. Cultivate media fasting as a spiritual discipline. Ancient traditions incorporated fasting not as punishment, but as purification, creating space for higher awareness to emerge. Apply this wisdom by designating media-free days or periods where digital input ceases completely. Notice how these fasts gradually restore sensitivity to your soul's own guidance. Much as eliminating sugar from diet eventually restores the palate's ability to detect subtle, natural sweetness. Practice conscious consumption by diversifying input beyond algorithm-selected content. Algorithms naturally narrow your exposure to reinforce existing patterns, creating spiritual echo chambers that limit growth. Intentionally seek wisdom from diverse traditions, perspectives that challenge rather than reinforce existing viewpoints, and content created with the explicit intention of elevating consciousness rather than exploiting attention. Strengthen your energetic field through regular communion with higher frequencies. Meditation, prayer, time in nature, creative expression, and service to others all generate vibrational states that fortify your spiritual immune system against lower frequencies encountered through media. These practices create a reservoir of higher energy that prevents immediate entrainment to fearful or anxious states when encountered. Implement the spiritual practice of selective attention, consciously choosing where your most precious resource flows. Remember that attention is not just psychological, but spiritual currency. Every moment of awareness directed towards specific content represents an energetic investment. By mindfully directing this investment toward that which uplifts, inspires, and enlightens, you reclaim spiritual agency from algorithms designed to direct it elsewhere. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, remember that your soul's natural state is one of expansive awareness, connectedness, joy, and peace. Any content that persistently pulls you away from these states is not serving your spiritual development, regardless of how compelling, entertaining, or seemingly important it presents itself to be. As Edgar wisely observed through his remarkable spiritual insights, mind is indeed the builder. What we think upon grows. In this digital age, this ancient wisdom takes on new urgency. By consciously choosing which thought seeds to plant and nurture through media consumption, you determine not just your momentary emotional state, but the very reality your soul creates and inhabits. The choice is yours in each moment. Will you allow your spiritual energy to be harvested by systems designed for attention extraction? Or will you reclaim your soul's power as the conscious creator of your experience? The answer to this question determines not just individual well-being, but our collective spiritual evolution in this unprecedented era of information abundance. If this message resonated with your spirit, take the first step toward reclaiming your energetic sovereignty today. Subscribe to receive more ancient wisdom applied to our modern challenges, and share your personal experience in the comments below. What sign of spiritual energy drain have you noticed most in your own life? Your insight may illuminate the path for another soul seeking freedom. Remember, in this digital age, conscious engagement is not just personal healing, it's spiritual revolution. Subscribe, comment, and join our growing community of awakened beings protecting their divine essence in a media-saturated world.